If you start a Skaven campaign in Total War Warhammer 3 and feel like your army is absolutely terrible, you are not alone. When I first tried Clanrats, I started the campaign again and again because I kept making the same mistake. I was trying to play the Skaven like a normal faction, I was trying to win the Frontline, I was trying to have fair fights, and that is exactly the wrong way to play the Skaven. The big lesson with Skaven is this: your army is not supposed to win cleanly. Your army is supposed to cheat, swarm, ambush, poison, summon rats behind the enemy, shoot them in the back, and turn the battle into a complete mess. That is when the Skaven finally start to make sense. This video is based on my written Skaven beginner guide on the G-Man Reviews blog, which I'll link in the description if you want the full written version while you play. Today I'm going to focus on beginner mistakes, why your frontline feels weak, and how to use cheap armies properly, how food works, why Menace Below is so useful, and why ambushes are one of the most important Skaven tools. So just before we move on to the next section, I have started with Tretch Craventail, which is Clanrats. So as you can see, I have a basic army of Clanrat spears. You start with 2 Storm Vermin, and you start with a Death Runner and an Assassin. So this is a very basic army that you would find for the Skaven. Let's move to section 2, where we talk about the Skaven are not a normal frontline faction. So the first thing you need to understand is that the Skaven are not a strong frontline faction, especially early on. If you're coming from factions with solid infantry like Dwarfs, Chaos Warriors, Cathay, or even Empire armies with decent support, Skaven can feel awful at first. That is because your early units are not there to dominate the enemy. Skavenslaves and Clanrats are not elite warriors, they are cheap bodies. Their job is to hold the enemy in place, waste time, absorb damage, and create openings for the units that actually do the killing. So if your Clanrats are losing to enemy infantry, that does not automatically mean you are playing badly. It means you are expecting the wrong thing from them. A Skaven frontline is not a wall. It is bait. It is a speed bump. It is a pile of disposable rats whose job is to keep the enemy busy while the rest of your army does the real work. So as you can see here, I did fill this up with Clanrats. But realistically, at all Skaven tier 1 buildings, you can create the 3 variants of slaves. So you're always going to have them. And the Skaven have very good recruitment. They have large capacity for recruitment, as you can see here, even very early on. So they can replenish their ranks pretty quickly. So let's move on to section 2, where we talk about what actually does the damage. So if your front line is not the thing winning the battle, what is? For Skaven, the real damage comes from everything behind and around the front line. That means missile units, artillery, monsters, weapon teams, magic, summons, and rear attacks. Once you start getting stronger tools like rattling guns, the faction suddenly starts to feel very different. Rattling guns are a perfect example of how the Skaven are supposed to work. You do not throw them into melee, you use cheap infantry to pin the enemy down and let the rattling guns fire into them from safety. That is the basic Skaven idea. The enemy gets stuck fighting garbage, and then the dangerous units do the killing. Before you get those stronger units, you still follow the same principle, just with weaker tools. So you use Skaven slave slingers, as you can see here. I started with 2. You use numbers, you use flanking, you use magic, you use rear charges. Do not use your basic infantry. Do not ask your basic infantry to carry the battle by themselves. They are not built for that. So we're going to talk about section 3, where we talk about in the early game, use cheap armies. Now the beginner problem is that the really fun Skaven units do not always arrive immediately. You might not have rattling guns yet, you might not have rat ogres yet, you might not have stronger tools to make the Skaven feel powerful. So what you do in these early turns, the answer is simple. You use cheap armies. Skaven are very good at filling armies with low-cost units like Skavenslaves and Skavenslingers. As you can see here, Skavenslaves have even the slingers have a very low cost of 38 upkeep, which is massively low, massively cheap, right? And while one bad Skaven army can feel weak, two bad Skaven armies can suddenly become dangerous. That was one of the big things that helped me understand Clanrats. Instead of making one early army do everything, I started using a cheap support army. That support army does not need to be beautiful, it does not need to be elite, it just needs enough bodies to help surround the enemy, absorb damage, and give your main army time to do the important work. With Skaven, quantity really does have a quality of its own. So we're going to move on to section 4, where we talk about how to fight with cheap Skaven armies. When you actually get into battle, do not just form one neat line and hope for the best. That is how you lose. Instead, think of the battle as a trap. Use one group of units to hold the enemy in place, then use your extra bodies to stretch around the side. Once the enemy is pinned, you want to envelop them, attack from the front, from the side, and from the rear. This matters because Total War battles are not only about killing every enemy soldier, they are also about leadership. If an enemy army is surrounded, taking damage, being shot, hit by magic, and charged from behind, its leadership starts falling apart. That is where cheap Skaven units become useful. A Skaven slave might not beat an enemy unit one-on-one, but if it helps surround that unit, distract it, and break its morale, then it has done its job. That is the Skaven mindset. You're not looking for honorable duels, you are looking for panic. So, before we move on to 5, I thought I would do a demonstration of a battle here. This is around about turn 20. Where we've got a army of Skaven slaves, and then we've got the main army with Clanrats that all have devastating flanker. So this battle is a close defeat. Let's see if we can turn that around with all the abilities that we've demonstrated so far. We've got 5 use of Menace Below, which I'll be touching on in a separate article later. Let's see if we can win this one. Alright. So we want to flood the Skaven with numbers. As you can see here, that the balance of favor is not currently in our favor right now. But we're going to wait for the reinforcements to come. Now, what I want to do, is I want to have the enemy army orient towards the Skavenslaves so that I can get devastating flanker with all my regular Skaven, right? Because my regular Skaven, all the Skaven in this army have got devastating flanker. So if they manage to get a flank charge, they're going to be good. Now, the one good thing about Skaven infantry is they're not as fast as cavalry, but they're much faster than regular infantry, right? So they can be better at doing things like flank charges and stuff like that, right? And they're slowly making their ways towards us. The good thing about dealing with dwarfs is that they're quite slow, and because they're moving as an army, they move with the slowest speed, and Chaos Dwarfs are really slow. So hopefully we should, and then they've got to get through this marsh here, which is going to slow them down even further. That being said, we want to be careful about the Hobgoblin bolt throwers. They have bad accuracy, but they're still artillery, so they shouldn't be underestimated. The first thing that we're going to do is I want to slow them down a little bit. So let's put some Clanrats here to get at and let's have them charge into the Hobgoblins. Okay, so so they're not actually defending the Hobgoblin bolt throwers. So you've seen now, we've taken them out of commission. They're focused on the enemy army. Great, let's charge them into the next Hobgoblin bolt thrower. And it looks like we're not going to have to deal with the Hobgoblin bolt throwers. Okay, and there comes our army. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause the screen. Is that all of them? Okay, that's all of them. Okay, so you can see how now the balance is still not technically in our favor. But we've gotten some extra time because these other units here have gone back, and we took out one of the Hobgoblin blunderbusses. Now this guy is the enemy leader. He's not on a He's not on anything so we can get at him. He's not flying, which is good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all our units of Skavenslaves. And we're going to line them up as fast as we possibly can in this line here. And we don't necessarily care. And then we're going to take the enemy lord, the witch lord, and have him come here. Now, we don't necessarily care about them surviving. What we care about is just, I want them to divert their ranks to try to... Okay, that's fine. But that's okay. They did their job, right? We're not going to be able to do that again. The AI has adjusted to it. So I'm playing on hard, but these tactics will still mostly work if you're playing on normal. They've arrived in ranks. And you'll notice that the Skaven slaves are in very high numbers, which is actually really good. We're going to set them to control group 2. We're going to group them. And now we're going to charge. Okay, actually, I'm going to hit control because I want them to preserve their... And so now the AI has a problem. The AI doesn't know who to orient to. We want them to orient to them. We need to move this faster. Let's have them charge. Now, we got another pair of hobgoblin bolt throwers here. Let's use our Menace Below to force... Come on. Now, yes! Kill them! Yes! Alright, cool. They're diverting. They're diverting their resources to try to take them on. The hobgoblin bolt thrower was destroyed. Cool. Time to send these guys in. Alright, okay. Ooh. Ah, no. Engage the blunderbusses. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to use... Okay, I'm not really worried about the Infernal Castellan. Yeah, let's get the blunderbusses. Let's get the blunderbusses. I want to take these guys out as quickly as possible. And Warp Lightning is good. Okay, let's put them here. Okay, and let's send in... Is he losing? Okay, my Doom Wheel is almost gone. What are we going to do with him? Okay, we need some Warp Lightning. Okay, are these Clanrat Spears? Clanrat Spears. Okay, we got a big dollop of Clanrat Spears. A Chaos... Come on! Hit him, hit him, hit him! Yes! Okay, what is happening? Okay, we need to be tricksy. Alright, let's use another Menace Below. Chaos Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. Okay, so the enemy lord is actually losing. So what we're going to do... Let's turn it around. If we can break the enemy lord. Alright. If we can break the enemy lord, we might be able to... Come on, he's losing. Is he losing? Yes, yes, yes. Let's use another Warp Lightning. Where's Tretch Craven Tau? Okay, the enemy lord is broken. We're going to kill him. Let's hit them. Let's hit these guys in the back. Okay, so he's broken. They're breaking. Okay, let's have a look. What do we got here in terms of combat? They're mostly broken. And they're running away. Let's use the Menace Below to attack here. This did not go 100% as... Yes, we got him! Okay, now I think this is going to turn around. Now, this is the early game, so with the Skaven, you're kind of limited in what options you have. When you have rattling guns, you're going to have a lot more firepower of your own. But the balance has shifted in our favor now. A Pyrrhic victory, but a victory nonetheless. This is unfortunately what you got to do in the early game. I probably shouldn't have fought this fight, but it just illustrates, you know, the tactics that you can use to sometimes, with the Skaven, turn the odds in your favor. So like using all their abilities. The Skaven are very similar to... They're kind of like Chaos Demons in the sense that they have a lot of abilities, but unlike Chaos Demons, you don't have a reliable frontline. So you've really got to make use of these abilities in order to win the battle. And the good thing about the Skaven is when they run away, they actually get bonuses for running away. So even if they run away, they're more likely to survive because of their speed, and then they come back and they fight again, as you saw. It's very chaotic in the fact that you don't have a reliable front line. But as long as the enemy is distracted by trying to deal with this sort of chaotic sort of battle here, you start to realize, now we got a good amount of food, and we got 20 food, which is good, which we'll talk about later. Alright, so just before we move on, I will come back to this, right? But I'm going to talk a little bit about the food mechanic here. So with the Skaven, as you can see, once you've conquered a battle, right, once you've occupied a settlement, you have the ability to use up food to increase the level that you put the settlement at here. We'll talk about it in a second, but it's just something to keep in mind that you can start your settlement at a higher tier if you use up extra food. So as you can see here, our settlement has now started at tier 3, which is actually really useful. Alright, so before we move on to section 5, we've come back to a later game of Clan Rictus. So before we move on to the next section, I wanted to go through a couple of things that were from the battle that I didn't really go into. I will move into it a bit, but I'll just do a quick recap here. So when I was in the battle, I was using this warlock, now, who had these 3 spells. I didn't really make use of this one, but I made use of Death Frenzy and Warp Lightning. Right? Warp Lightning is a pretty good spell for a basic spell. It has very long range at 200, and it's a bombardment, so you just drop it on things. Death Frenzy is also another really good one for the Skaven, because what it does is that with the Skaven, you're likely to have huge clumps of infantry. So when you cast it on them, for 28 seconds, when it's at the highest level, right, all your allies in the range get plus 30 base weapon damage, plus 30% armor piercing weapon damage, melee attack plus 24, and immune to psychology, which is awesome for the Skaven. We're going to move on to section 5, where we talk about magic and heroes help your bad troops perform better. Now, this is also where magic and heroes become important. Your basic troops are weak, but they become more useful when the enemy is already under pressure. For example, if you have a Grey Seer with Plague Magic, you can use spells to weaken or disrupt enemy units. If you have abilities that add poison or reduce enemy effectiveness, they make your cheap units more annoying to fight. The goal is not to turn Skavenslaves into elite warriors. The goal is to make the enemy's situation worse. Poison them, slow them, lower their leadership, hit them from behind, shoot them while they are stuck, make every fight as unpleasant as possible for the enemy. That is the Skaven way. Spell selection on a Grey Seer. So, like I said, on a Grey Seer, which I don't have, I'll just recruit one for a second. Well, we have a Warlock here, right? So, with the Warlock, as you can see here, they've got their spells. We've got we got a breath spell. We've got what they call a augment spell, which is a buff spell, essentially. We've got a bombardment spell, which is the spell that I was dropping on the enemy units, which was causing the lightning to come down. So, like I said, using magic and is very important part of the Skaven. Like the spells that you have and the heroes, so before in that battle, you saw that I was making use of this hero here, which was the Assassin. Now, Assassins are very good on the map, but they're also very good, they're very good at dealing with single unit targets like Lords and Heroes. Because they have things like concealment bombs, they can charge at enemy units without being seen, which can allow them to get into position to get enemy units. So in this army as well, you start with Death Runners as well, which are basically as you can see here, they also have concealment bombs and Vanguard deployment and Stalk, which is actually really good. As you can see here, it's effective when flanking. So sending these guys in to deal with enemy heroes or spellcasters that aren't flying can be a very, very useful thing to do. Especially as well since they have Weak Being Blade, which is armor minus 50% to anything that they're fighting, which is actually really good. It's really good. Right, as you can see here, the Assassins have Poison, which is awesome, and Poison stacks with Weeping Blade. So, yeah, as you can see, you just start applying debuffs to enemies, and then when you stack it on with things like the Death Frenzy spell on your own troops, you start to see how the Skaven can stack a lot of debuffs in order to deal with enemy units in ways that might make them considerably easier to deal with. So, if this video is helping you understand why the Skaven feel so strange at first, consider subscribing to the channel. I do a lot of strategy guides like this, especially where we break down the mechanics that the game does not always explain clearly. And if you prefer having the written version open while you play, I've linked the full Skaven beginner guide from the G-Man Reviews blog in the description. Now let's talk about the campaign mechanic that makes the Skaven even weirder, which is food. So let's move on to section 6, where we talk about food is your campaign engine. Now, for Skaven, food is one of the most important mechanics you need to understand. Food affects your faction, and if it gets low, you start taking penalties. So as a beginner, your first rule is simple: do not ignore the food bar. Try to keep the food at least in a safe range. You gain food by winning battles, occupying settlements, raising settlements, and through different Skaven mechanics depending on your faction and situation. But the big mistake is spending food carelessly. Food is not just a bonus resource, food is part of how the Skaven expand. It helps you grow faster, it supports your campaign momentum, and it can be used in some very powerful ways. But if you spend food much too quickly, the faction starts punishing you. So beginner advice is use food but respect it. Do not bankrupt yourself just because the game gives you a tempting option. So as you can see here, we've got the food meter up here. Down here, it tells you the plus symbol or the minus symbol tells you how much food you're generating per turn. So as you can see here, I'm actually generating food, +2 food per turn, right? Now, you almost always want to keep this in the positive. Now, when you take over a settlement, it might show that it's going significantly lower, but that's because you've used up the settlement in order to upgrade the tier of the settlement before. So as you can see before, after I had conquered that settlement, I used food to get the settlement up to level 3. So you can actually spend food in that way to upgrade your settlement. Now, I would always keep the food in surplus, right? I wouldn't go any lower than that. Right? That's the basic guide. I did do a more advanced guide to food that I'll link to in this video. But yeah, that's something to understand when it comes to food. We're going to move on to section 7 where we talk about Menace Below is a dirty trick, not a main army. Now, you did sort of see this ability used when I was doing the battle. When I was recruiting units of Skaven behind the enemy, that's how I was doing it with the Menace Below ability. Now, one of the best uses of food is the Menace Below ability. Before a battle, you can spend food to gain uses of this ability. In battle, it lets you summon a unit of Clanrats on the battlefield. Now, beginners might look at the summon unit and think, well, it is only Clanrats, that is not very impressive. But that misses the point. Menace Below is not powerful because the summon unit is amazing. It is powerful because it appears exactly where the enemy does not want it. You can drop it behind enemy archers. You can summon it on artillery like I did when I was doing the battle. I was summoning it behind artillery so I could get a rear charge onto them. You can use it to rear charge an enemy unit that is already fighting in your front line. You can use it to distract the AI and mess with their formation. You can use it to add one more source of leadership pressure at exactly the wrong moment for the enemy. That is why Menace Below is so useful. It is not about summoning a great unit, it is about creating chaos. So we're going to move on to section 8 where we talk about combining Menace Below with your main battle plan. So the best way to use Menace Below is to combine it with everything else you are already doing. Do not just summon Clanrats randomly and forget about them. Use them at the moment when the enemy is already under pressure. For example, if an enemy unit is fighting your Clanrats in front, summon Menace Below behind it. Now that enemy unit is being attacked from both sides. Then hit it with Slinger Fire, then use magic, then charge something else into the rear if you can. This is how the Skaven turned bad units into a winning situation. No individual piece is impressive by itself, but when you stack all the pressure together, the enemy starts to collapse. That is the trick. The Skaven are not always about having one powerful unit to carry the whole fight. They are about stacking unfair little advantages until the enemy breaks. So we're going to move on to section 9 where we talk about using food to upgrade settlements that I covered before. Food is also important when you occupy settlements. Skaven can spend food to occupy a settlement at a higher level. This is very powerful because it lets you grow faster and access better buildings sooner. But again, you need to be careful. Just because you can spend food does not always mean you should. For minor settlements, going to level 2 can often be useful if you have enough food. For important capitals, spending more food can be worth it because those settlements are more valuable and can unlock better buildings. But if spending food drops you into bad food level, like for instance into normal food levels or food shortage or starving for food, you need to think twice. Skaven can snowball very hard when food is managed well, but it can, if you burn through it without thinking, you can weaken your whole campaign. So the simple beginner rule is this: spend food where it gives you real value, especially important settlements, but do not drop your food level so low that your faction starts suffering. Another thing to keep in mind about food is be careful about expanding with the Skaven too quickly, right? You need to understand that with every single settlement, you require food upkeep for it, right? So I believe it's 1 food per settlement. So make sure that you always have enough food production to manage your settlement upkeep. There are many ways in the game. I actually did a second section on food that you can go into, but there are many ways that you can get more food, such as through technology, like you can see here. But just be aware, you always want to be aware of your food production. So if you're expanding too quickly, forget about that. And also focus on settlements, on capitals. Capitals are considerably more useful for the Skaven because of the way that their economy works. All their buildings generate a certain amount of economy. So instead of having, say, 1 building that generates income, all their buildings do. That's one thing to keep in mind with the Skaven. But like I said, focus on enemy capitals. They are the bigger importance for the Skaven. So we're going to move on to section 10, where we talk about ambush is your friend. Now let's talk about one of the most important Skaven tools, ambush. Skaven armies use the stalk stance as their default movement stance. This means when they attack, they can potentially trigger an ambush battle. That is huge because remember, the main rule is Skaven do not want fair fights. Ambushes let you attack the enemy before they are properly ready. They let you hide your position. They let you catch armies that might beat you in a normal battle. They let you split the enemy apart and create unfair situation. That is exactly what the Skaven want. If you are playing Skaven and constantly taking normal, fair, clean battles, you're probably making your own life harder than it needs to be. You should be thinking like a rat. Hide, bait, trap, ambush, and then overwhelm the enemy before they can respond properly. One thing about this is that the Skaven by default have the stalk stance, which allows them to potentially ambush enemies. But the Skaven have an ability to get high ambush, right? In the blue tree, Ancient Cunning will increase your ambush success chance, right? At level 3, it goes up to ambush plus 30, which is huge. You can also stack this with hero abilities as well. So it's something to keep in mind as well, that there's an ability called Cunning that will increase, that a hero can have and a lord can have, that will increase, as you can see, it's here. Ambush success chance plus 25 for armies in local owned region. So this is huge for stacking, for increasing your ambush ability. Now, the way that you would use this is, for instance, if I have, say, a settlement, if I want to bait an enemy into attacking, say, Black Fortress here, what I would do is, if there is an enemy that is more powerful that can take the fortress, but may not be able to take these 2 armies on top, what I'll do if there's a local enemy there, I'll go right up to Black Fortress, and I'll put these 2 armies. So the red outline here is the reinforcement range of this settlement. So what I could do is, I'll give you a demonstration here. So I'll just end the turn for the sake of it. Alright, so we're going to move on to section 11. I will come back to that point that I was talking about. So section 11 is using multiple armies and garrisons. Another beginner habit that helps a lot is using multiple armies and garrisons together. Skaven armies can be weak individually, especially early on, but when you combine a main army, a cheap support army, and a nearby settlement garrison, suddenly the battle looks very different. This is especially useful when you are dealing with stronger enemy lords or dangerous early threats. Do not be afraid to pull back toward a settlement. Do not be afraid to use reinforcement range. And again, this is not about proving that your rats can win a fair fight. It's about making sure that the enemy never gets one. If the enemy attacks what looks like a weak target, but then your second army and garrison join the fight, that is a very Skaven victory. You baited them, you trapped them, you buried them under rats, that is exactly the point. To do this as a demonstration, just for purposes, I've got this army here, which is the Sentinels, right? And the Sentinels has this garrison here, which is quite weak. But let's just say theoretically for a second, this garrison was quite powerful. Or it was as powerful as this one, right? Now, the red outline, when I hover over the Sentinels, is the reinforcement range, right? So that means if any of my armies are attacked in this range, the garrison here can reinforce. So what I could do is I could bait the enemy into attacking this target. So let's just say there was an army that was here. What I could do is I could come out here, go into ambush stance, which is this one here. And as you can see, I've got a 95% chance of ambush. So what that means is if the enemy tries to attack this settlement, the enemy doesn't actually know that there's a 95% chance of not knowing that this army is here. So if this army was also here, right, in ambush stance, when they move into range, I would, one, have a chance to ambush them, but two, if they attack the Sentinels, this army suddenly reinforces, right? So now they go from the AI will always try to fight favorable battles. So you can use ambush stance to trick the AI into thinking that it's going to get a favorable battle when it's not. So that's a tactic that you can use with the Skaven. That is something to keep in mind. So we're going to move on to section 12 where we talk about common beginner mistakes. So let's quickly summarize the big beginner mistakes. Mistake number 1, expecting your frontline to win. Your Clanrats and Skavenslaves are not there to be heroes. They are there to hold, distract, and die usefully. Mistake number 2, not using enough bodies. A cheap second army can make a massive difference in the early game. Mistake number 3, wasting food. Food is powerful, but if you spend it recklessly, your campaign can start falling apart. Mistake number 4, using Menace Below randomly. Do not just summon rats anywhere. Use them behind archers. Use them on artillery. As you saw when I did in the battle with the Hobgoblin bolt throwers. Or behind units that are already fighting. Mistake number 5, fighting fair. This is the biggest one. If you're playing the Skaven, fair fights are a mistake. You want ambushes, reinforcements, summons, rear attacks, poison, magic, overwhelming numbers, and any advantage that you can get in your vicinity. Any advantage at all. Now, one thing that I didn't cover is Warp Bomb, right? So what this actually does is, for any armies that are in range, you can actually use this on a unit of yours, any unit, and it will blow up and it will take down. So great to use on a unit of Skavenslaves that are engaged with something way more powerful to do it, to sacrifice them. So that's something to keep in mind. I will go into more details about this if you guys want. Always put the good stuff in the comments, but yeah. So we're going to move on to section 13 where we talk about the final summary. The main thing to remember is the Skaven are not bad just because their early units are weak. They are bad if you use them like a normal army. Once you accept that your frontline is disposable, the faction starts making a lot more sense. Your cheap infantry holds the enemy in place. Your slingers, weapon teams, artillery, monsters, magic, and heroes do the real damage. Your food fuels your campaign. Your Menace Below summons create chaos. Your ambush stance lets you avoid fair fights. One thing that I did not cover is that when you are in ambush stance and you move, the AI will not see you unless they discover your ambush. And the percentage number here will tell you what the chance of them discovering it is. Obviously, that gets affected by other things. But for the most part, if it says 95, that means they have a 95% chance of not discovering you, right? And like I said, and your second army turns weak individual fights into a swarm that can overwhelm much stronger enemies, like you saw in the battle before. That is the Skaven beginner mindset. Do not fight fair. Do not rely on one clean battle line. Do not expect honor. Use every dirty trick the faction gives you, because once you start playing Skaven like sneaky, cowardly, backstabbing rats, they become one of the most fun factions in Total War Warhammer 3. So if you found this useful, subscribe for more Total War Warhammer guides and strategy breakdowns. I've also linked the full written Skaven beginner guide on the G-Men Reviews blog in the description, so you can keep it open while you play. If you want a follow-up, I can cover Skaven food, economy, buildings, and campaign expansion in more detail in part 2. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.